Hello everyone, welcome back to 17 square meters garden. In today's video I'm gonna be potting up my berry perennials and my summer flowering bulbs. I have some pretty lily varieties. These are the plants that I ordered in one of my recent videos where I shared what new plants I'm gonna be adding to my balcony garden this year. I explained a little bit how I'm planning my garden for the season. And in that video I placed an order for berry perennials and for summer flowering bulbs. So the plants have been delivered at the beginning of March, so it's finally time to plant them. And although I have already a video on how to plant berry perennials, I have a video on how to plant lilies in pots, though that video is pretty old, so I don't think I said many interesting things in it. But yeah, I thought I would share with you this project today in case if you also bought some summer flowering bulbs, some berry perennials, and perhaps it's the first time that you're going to be planting them. And you are wondering maybe how to plant them, when to plant them, what to do with them, and how to maintain them later on. So hopefully in this video I can answer some of your questions. So let's go. Okay, so here are my plants. As you can see, they started already some of them started to sprout in their plastic bags, so that's not good at all. If you have already your summer flowering bulbs and your summer berry perennials, plant them as fast as you can. It's not good at all to keep them, in their plastic bags on some shelf in your house, because as you can see, the humidity develops inside of these bags and they can simply rot. Some fungal growth can develop. If you are in a situation like me where you don't currently have a space to plant them on your balcony or somewhere in on your patio or wherever it is that you garden, and usually I would just use the containers of my early spring flowering bulbs, so early flowering daffodils and crocus and such. By the end of March they are already done blooming, so I have empty containers so I can plant my stuff directly. But that's not the case this year. This year the bulbs are just starting to bloom, so I'm gonna be using temporary plastic pots, and then early summer I'm gonna repot them into their final containers once they are available. Okay, here are all of my lilies. I have 3 bulbs of Lilium regale. These are really gorgeous, very tall lilies with beautiful large trumpet-shaped flowers. I have Lilium speciosum variety rubrum. They have plenty of flowers on coming from one stem. And I have also Lily Candy Blossom, which is a beautiful double bloom pink lily. So a few words about lilies before we start to plant them. So lilies are amazing plants for containers. They grow really, really well in containers. The first year that you plant them, you can already expect a lot of blooms from them. They are best grown in partial shade. So if you have a northeast or east facing balcony, that's perfect. If you have a sunny balcony, south facing or something like that, you can still plant lilies, but obviously watering can become an issue because lilies don't like heat and draft. So you will have to keep them well watered, and you will have to probably mix some compost with the potting mix and mulch the container so that to prevent water from evaporation, to keep the roots nice and moist. Lilies are also very winter hardy, so once you plant them on your balcony, and you don't have to dig them up for winter time, unless obviously you live in a very cold climate, like below zone 6. There are different lilies to choose from. There are trumpet-shaped lilies, like the Lilium regale that I have here. There are Martagon lilies with reflexed petals. There are Asiatic lilies and Oriental lilies. Some have fragrance, some don't have fragrance. So there's really a lot to choose from. I would say the only downside, well, it's not really a downside, but it's a shame that they don't bloom for a very long time. Lilies are not the type of flowers that will bloom all season long or that will be repeat flowering. They bloom once and that's it, and they don't bloom for a very long time. I would say they bloom for about 2-3 weeks in summer. Some bloom longer, some bloom for a shorter period of time. Then obviously you deadhead the flowers and you keep the foliage and you let the foliage accumulate the energy, send the energy to the bulb so that it has the energy to bloom next year. Okay, so now we are gonna plant our lilies. I have prepared 3 plastic pots. Again, these are only temporary pots. These are too small to grow lilies. I mean, if you were to plant 1 bulb per pot, it would be fine, but usually we plant lilies by 3s or by 5s for better visual effect, for better flower show. So I fill them to about a half with multi-purpose potting mix. That's what's going to work for lilies. You could plant them in a loam-based, but I prefer to plant them in a multi-purpose potting mix. These containers are about 23-24 centimeters in diameter, but if you were to plant lilies in their final containers, you will choose a container that is about 30 centimeters in diameter. And for larger lilies like tree lilies or Lilium regale that are very tall, you would choose a container about 40 centimeters wide. And if you have a container of 30 centimeters in diameter, then you can plant 3 bulbs in that one container. So I'm gonna go and plant my lily candy blossom. You will plant them about 10 to 15 centimeters deep. That's from the base of the plant. Mine have already started to sprout, but that's okay. And you will space them about 10 centimeters apart, and you will cover them with multi-purpose potting mix. Okay, next lily is Lilium speciosum variety rubrum. Look at the size of this bulb. So as I said, usually we plant lilies by 3s or by 5s for better visual effect, but this one is humongous. Look at the size of this bulb. I have never seen lily as large as this one. So generally I have only one. I thought they come in 3s, but there's only one bulb. I just realized that it's maybe worth to mention that you can totally bury the flower stalk, the bloom stalk that is already developing. You have to bury it, otherwise you wouldn't plant your lily at the correct depth. So just bury it and it's gonna find its way up towards the light. So you see, that's what happens when you keep your bulbs or your plants too long in their plastic pots. They rot. You see, they start to rot, the humidity starts to enter, and the roots start to get all soggy. I mean, it's still fine. I'm gonna remove those soggy roots. If you notice that something is wrong with the roots, if they look unhealthy, if they look soggy, just trim them off. And any parts of the bulb that seem, a little bit affected. These are really large lilies. You could plant them one by one because they are so large. So if you were to plant very tall lilies, as I said, choose a container that is 40 centimeters wide and pretty deep for the stability of the plant. Because it's gonna grow so tall, it's gonna become top heavy. And you will need also to stake these. If you have lilies that are above 1 meter tall, it's a good idea to stake them. It's really important once the bulbs start to grow to keep them well watered. For now I'm just gonna use just plain water, and then when I will see above ground growth, when they will start to actively grow, I'm gonna feed them with Alga bloom. That's a fertilizer for flowering plants, so to promote healthy growth and abundant flowering later on in summer. Okay, you guys, and now quickly a few words about berry perennials. As I said, I already have a tutorial, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about this once again to not repeat myself. But if you're a beginner gardener, if you have never heard the bare root perennial term before, what are perennial plants in general? Perennial plants are plants that can live for several years. There are 3 different types of perennial plants. There are hardy perennials, so those that can survive winter outside. There are half-hardy perennials, so those that can tolerate some frost, some light frost, but they won't survive harsh frost outside. And there are tender perennials, so those that are not tolerant of cold temperatures, that need to be brought inside during winter time, otherwise they will die. So bare root perennials are perennials that are delivered, as the name indicates, as bare roots. Here you already see a plant starting to sprout, but usually it will be just roots. So no soil, no pot, just roots. And there are several advantages to buying plants this way. For example, you can get your hands on many more varieties. There's a greater range of plants available as bare roots, and it's also way cheaper to buy plants like this. A lot of the times you will find bare root perennials sold as 3 roots. For example, here I have a geranium. There are 3 roots of geraniums in here. So that's pretty much 3 plants for the price of 1. So that's a really great deal. But there is also, let's say, one disadvantage, and I think that not a lot of people talk about this, and that's something very important to mention, is that because they are delivered as bare roots, like you see, that's not much. The plant will take a lot of time to establish. So if you bought a flowering plant, don't expect any flowers the first year. And even if the flowers appear, it's better to pinch the flowers off so that your plant sends energy to the roots, so that it establishes nice and healthy roots, so that it produces vegetative growth rather than flowers. And then only the second year and the year after, that is going to actually put on a show that is actually going to look like in the picture. So if you bought a bare root perennial and the first year, the first summer, it looks miserable, everything is fine. Don't worry, it's exactly as it is supposed to be. So that's one downside, that if you want flowers the first year, if you want a beautiful show, then perhaps bird perennial is not a good option, because here you have to be patient. You have to give it at least 2-3 years and to care for it during those 2-3 years before it establishes, so that then it produces nice and beautiful flowers. So obviously, as I said, take them out of their package as soon as possible. Take a look at the roots. If you see that some roots look unhealthy or that they are dry, dead, broken, damaged, trim them off. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just trim off a little of this hosta, and then here we have geraniums. You can cut off that dead top growth. So now we are gonna soak our berried perennials for about 3 to 6 hours. It's really important to soak them to rehydrate those roots before you plant them. And I have been asked already, what if I didn't soak them? I didn't know I was supposed to soak them, or I completely forgot I was supposed to soak them. Should I take the plant out of its pot and re-soak it? No, absolutely not. Once you plant your plants, leave them in their containers undisturbed, but then make sure that you water them really well, that you keep the soil moist so that they don't dry out in that container. Okay, you guys, my berried perennials have been soaking for a few hours now. It's time to plant them. So if you are gonna plant your berried perennials directly in your garden, I still suggest that you use temporary pots before, so that you plant them in temporary pots before planting them directly in ground, because they don't look like much, and there is a risk that you will either forget about them, or they will just simply get overcrowded by larger, more mature plants. So it's always the best idea to pot them on, and once they are in full growth, then early summer you can transfer them into their final spot in your garden. The same goes for balcony gardening, because as I said, they are not gonna look like much this first year. So it's maybe better to plant them in temporary pots and save your more decorative, more ornamental pots for something that is gonna flower, something that is gonna put on a show this year. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I chose purposely a larger containers because I'm gonna be planting these plants in this container today, and I'm gonna be keeping them in these containers for the whole year. It's only next spring, once they have put on some real growth, that I'm gonna be transferring them from these temporary pots into their final pots. Okay, so in my temporary pots I have multi-purpose potting mix. I suggest using multi-purpose for planting berried perennials at first, because it's really lightweight. So it will allow the roots to develop nicely, and then if you are gonna transfer them into final containers, you can switch to loam-based potting mix, which is better for more mature plants. So of course here you have roots, you have crown of the plant, and then you have the top growth above ground growth, the crown of the plant just below the soil surface, and then all the above ground growth above the soil. Here again we see very clearly roots, the crown of the plant that is going to be buried, and then the top growth above the soil. I'm going to be planting all three in the same pot today, but next spring I'm going to repot them into their separate pots once they are bigger, once they've put on some growth. But for the first year, this pot will be sufficient for the 3 plants. So obviously after planting, keep your plants well watered. You would want to keep them well watered during the entire season, and once they start to actively grow, feed them with a grow fertilizer, so a fertilizer that is suitable for the growth phase of your plants. Even if they start flowering, as I said, it's best to pinch the flowers off and to continue to fertilize them with a grow fertilizer to encourage more vegetative, more leafy growth. This way you will end up with a stronger, more developed plant next year. Okay, you guys, so this is it for today's video. I do hope that you found it helpful. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!